Good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Carter, and I'm happy to be with you today, broadcasting remotely from the Henry B. Plant Museum. And I'm joined by Heather Trubee Brown from her social distancing home far away. And we are glad to be with you this morning to present a program and chat with you about J.A. Wood, the Tampa Bay Hotel architect. And he's been fascinating to us for many, many years and kind of a mysterious person. And we've gathered tidbits of information over the last 30 years about Mr. Wood, and we're going to share some of that with you this morning. So I'm going to screen share so you can see a PowerPoint that we've put together, and we hope you'll enjoy it. So thank you for joining us today.
And Susan, while you're getting that screen share up, I just want to let everybody know who's watching that we will be monitoring questions and chat in both the Zoom and the Facebook platforms. So if anybody has a question that they'd like us to address, please type it in the chat box or the Q&A of the Zoom. And at the end, we will answer those questions. So thanks for being here. All right. So this morning, as Susan mentioned, we're going to take a look at the architect J.A. Wood and a closer look at his Tampa Bay Hotel and the exotic architecture of that building. And it's a building that continues to captivate us even today and fascinate us more than 100 years later. And so as Susan mentioned, there's not much known about Wood personally. He was born in Poughkeepsie, New York in 1837. And so we're going to go through and introduce him a little bit and some of his other architectural work before we get to exploring the Tampa Bay Hotel in detail. And so he began his career in architecture in the 1860s. He's first mentioned in city directories in 1863. And here we have a slide showing an advertisement for his services in 1864 and 65. And this is an excerpt from the Poughkeepsie City Directory. And if you read through this, you'll see the different styles of architecture and design that he was focusing on. So I'll pause for a moment so you can read it. And so, as you can see, it's a rather diverse list of styles, and this is rather early in his career. Now, at some point by the 1870s, he moved his office and it was listed as being in New York City. So Susan, the next slide, please. Now, though we don't know much about him as a person, we are fortunate that he left such a record of his professional life. And so in just 40 years, he designed 40 known works. Some of his buildings have been lost to time, but there are some wonderful examples that still remain standing today, as well as in photograph. And so what we have here, this is an example of his work that still stands on the Vassar College campus. And this is Avery Hall. And as you can see there from the slide, he designed this in 1866. His last known work he designed in 1908, and he died just 2 years later. So he was very active up until the end of his life. And so he designed a number of buildings for Matthew Vassar, and some of them are still on Vassar's campus. And it's worth mentioning that 3 of Wood's structures are on the National Historic Register. Can anyone name one of the 3 for some of our audience tuning in who might be familiar with at least one of them?
Yes, Heather, my favorite one is this building.
Yay, good for you, Susan. Yes,
and here are the other 2.
And thumbs up to those of you who knew the Tampa Bay Hotel was on the National Historic Register. The other 2 of his are both on Vassar's campus.
So those are still standing, and so many of his buildings are now gone. And we just have a few photographs.
So next slide, please. We don't know when Wood and Henry Plant met, but Plant would have definitely been familiar with Wood's work. He was known for some significant hotels in the Catskills area, and they're listed here on this slide. But also once Wood transitioned his office to New York City, Plant definitely would have been familiar with him as being a New York architect. And so what's interesting about these three locations, the one there at the bottom is the Mizentop Hotel. And according to a January 9th, 1891 New York Times article, it talked about some of the features of this hotel. And it stated that, quote, it was piped for gas and for water, which comes to each floor. Electric bells and steam heating apparatus are among the conveniences. That's the end of the quote. It goes on to say that the building had a billiard room, a bowling alley, and telegraph lines. And now this is significant because some of those are very similar to what we have in the Tampa Bay Hotel. And this same article goes on to talk about the Summit Mountain House, which was the largest hotel in the Catskills. And it talks about how the main building had 2 towers and a piazza running 300 feet along the front of the building with columns 2 stories tall. Again, very similar to our Tampa Bay Hotel. And then there was a piazza at the rear and a baggage elevator. There was a wine and billiard room and a barber shop in the basement. And there was water, electric, and steam heat to all floors, as well as a bowling alley. And then another interesting note about the Mizentop Hotel, it says that at the end of the first floor hall is a dining room, and on the second floor is a complete dining room for the use of children and their nurses, a fact which will be appreciated by mothers, for the necessity of having their children presentable for the parlor at every meal will be obviated. So it's also a great look into a little bit of Victorian lifestyle there. Okay, next slide, please, Susan.
Here we go, Piney Woods Hotel.
And this was one of Wood's prominent hotels in the South. This was in Thomasville, Georgia, and it was actually noted to be the largest hotel in Georgia. And you see there on the slide, it opened in 1885. Unfortunately, it burnt down in 1906. But you can see the layout, the grandeur and the scale of this building, and that some of the basic layout does resemble some of the Tampa Bay Hotel. Now, it was apparently in 1886 commented in some publication that Wood had used a Queen Anne style of architecture for the Piney Wood. And he wrote this following response in which he clearly stated his thoughts on the Queen Anne style. So I'll let you read that.
Yes, he wasn't too fond of Queen Anne style.
He did not leave any room for misunderstanding about that on both his personal and professional opinion. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the Queen Anne style, that's a photograph of the Queen Anne style there in the lower right of the previous slide with the quote. So then as we start to, yes, there is the Queen Anne style. As we start to think about Wood and his design of the Tampa Bay Hotel, we wanted to talk about some of his influences, or some of the architectural styles and people who influenced him. And this is a design that was made by architect Leopold Eidlitz, and he's one of the founding members of the American Institute of Architects. And this is what Eidlitz designed for P.T. Barnum, his home in Connecticut, and it was called Iranistan. And then Susan, if you want to, and one of the other significant architectural structures that also influenced Wood was this one. This is a view of some of the horseshoe archways at Alhambra in Granada, Spain. And so Wood really liked the Moorish architectural style that he found, that he saw prevalent in parts of Spain and North Africa. And this is an example of that. And then Susan, unless you had something else to add about Alhambra or Iranistan, I thought perhaps you'd like to speak about Wood and the Tampa Bay Hotel.
Yes, this is an early photograph and the only one that we have that shows J.A. Wood. He's in the light colored suit on the far left, and Henry Plant is in the center of this picture. And this is a site visit on the grounds of the hotel. And it's quite a group of dignitaries. The Vice President of the United States was in the group, as well as a lot of the local businessmen from the Tampa area. Shortly thereafter, here we start with the construction of the hotel. And it went up in 2.5 years, which was record time for a building of this size, with the tools and things they had back in the 1880s. So it's remarkable. And it's fascinating to see the scaffolding around those minarets. Wood used a lot of signature features in his design of the Tampa Bay Hotel, including the minarets, cupolas, domes, verandas, horseshoe arches, and gingerbread woodwork. And we're going to show you some of those examples as we look further into our property, the Tampa Bay Hotel. So this view shows you view of the rooftop, and you can see some of those onion dome minarets. There were 6 up there on the roof, and they have various features to the minarets, and I'll show you some of those. This is a rare view of the interior of one of the minarets, and you can see the brickwork, how it's rounded. And today they have gone in and done some reinforcing with steel beams and steel cabling to make them extra strong, but they are very narrow in the staircases. And this slide shows you a drawing by Reed Allen Black, who's an architect who came and did measured drawings way back in the early 80s of the building, since we didn't have anything left from wood. And so we still refer to those, and he's got the schematic of the minaret, and it's fascinating to see all the different levels that there are. So the red arrows are showing you all the stairs that go up into the top. And of course, these crown the rooftop. They have dormer windows. The area at the top that's the open air section is called the lantern. They also have a finial with a crescent moon, a gold crescent moon at the very top. Another example of the Moorish style that's been incorporated with the building. There's another view, so you can see the different levels. It's about 10 stories off the ground when you get to the top of a minaret. The hotel stands 4 main stories and a small 5th story, and then to go to the top of a minaret, you're 10 stories off the ground. Another architectural feature are the cupolas. And here are a couple pictures of the cupolas, and they also have dormer windows. I've never been in a cupola before. We aren't sure about the access, but they did have the windows, so there must be a way to get up there. Also, in this view on the right, you see one of the skylights, and there are several skylights on the roof of our building that shine the light down to the all the way to the first floor. This is another signature element for the Tampa Bay Hotel, one of the sweeping verandas that goes down. This is the west front, or this is the east front of the hotel that faced out to the Hillsborough River. And this is also the east front with that beautiful double facade with the pendants that hang down. And it's a double row. Today, it's only a single row. I guess storms and hurricanes probably knocked the first row off many years ago, but this is how it originally looked. So you see that beautiful gingerbread arching woodwork that was made of cypress wood. Lots of horseshoe shapes. This is a view of the Alhambra detail work of one of the arches. And when you look at the Tampa Bay Hotel, you can see the influence with these same sorts of arches, and especially the red brick ones around the door openings, as seen down in the lower picture. You get a good view of the horseshoe arches on the main verandas. Here's an architectural element that's beautiful. This is the one of the decorative chrysanthemum windows, and these are found on the east and west fronts of the hotel. And you can see some of those little balconies right out in front of those areas that were accessible. The windows opened up and you could stand right out there on the very edge of the building. This is something that was added to the building, and it was a wine cellar, and it still stands. It's on the north end of the property today, and it's next to what was the hotel kitchen and not far from the dining room. Heather, would you like to talk about some of the dome work?
Yes. That's one of the other signature features of Wood and specific to the Tampa Bay Hotel. We're fortunate that we have 3 domes on the Tampa Bay Hotel. This view shows the west front, which at the time of the hotel, this was the main entrance for the building for guests arriving by train. And so those 2 symmetrical domes are over top the music room on the right and the grand salon on the left. And they're quite large, but they're not as large as the 3rd dome, which sits atop the dining room. And Susan, and there we go. So this dome is much larger, and you can see that around this, there are dormer windows. There are 12 of them that encircle the dome and allow more light to come in as skylights to illuminate the dining room. If you haven't been in this room in the building, I definitely suggest that in the future you stop by and see it. It's quite impressive. And this is a great photo because it shows the sunflower finials that adorn each of those dormer windows. So quite a bit of attention to detail.
Yes, definitely. And you can see the reflectiveness of the stainless steel new coating on the building. Originally, the minarets and the domes were all covered in metal. And I think, Heather, you found that name in the architect's notes, right? Point Mr. Was it?
Yes, it was, if I recall quickly and accurately, it was old style Taylor's Pointminster.
That's correct. Okay. There is the interior of the dining room, and that would be the dome at the far top of the building. And then we have a slide of the Oglethorpe Hotel. And this is a building that Wood did just prior to the Tampa Bay Hotel. And it almost looks like the sister of the Tampa Bay Hotel because it's so similar with the brickwork and all.
And Susan, if we might back up once to the previous slide, you mentioned that's the interior of the dining room. One key thing to note about this is you see the curtains there at the top. There is a balcony up there, and that's something that does not exist on the grand salon or the music room domes. This is much larger, and so that balcony allowed for musicians to sit and enjoy to play music for diners down on the main floor to enjoy. So that's interesting that that dome is so large. It allows for all that extra space.
Right, and those 12 windows that circle the dome allowed a lot of natural light to come right in to the dining area and the musician area also. And then there's a postcard view of the Oglethorpe Hotel. And unfortunately, this building is no longer there. I think it went down in the 1950s.
1958, yes.
Okay.
Is when it closed.
And here's still another view.
And as you mentioned, this looking like a sister hotel, it really does bear a great resemblance to the original intended footprint of the Tampa Bay Hotel, being rather rectangular and symmetrical with towers, or in our case, the minarets on each of the 4 corners and 2 in the center.
Right. And after Wood constructed this property, he came down and did the Tampa Bay Hotel. And this is one of the things that he added to the north end of the property. He added a solarium. And you see that at the double row of windows there to the far right, that's the solarium area, and it was added on. And then he added on the dining room. In the far right, you see the dining room with the big, huge dome added on. And then the buildings that are also part of that dining area that are all clumped together are what was the kitchen area of the hotel. And one of the ways that we know a lot about the hotel construction is we have a group of original letters that were handwritten in pencil by Alexander Browning. And Browning was Wood's assistant architect. And many years ago in the 80s, his family, John Browning from Sarasota, came and brought us these letters. So we have these as part of our archive. And it's just amazing to see his original words and everything about the hotel. That's how we learned what the metal was on the roof. And a lot of the information that we have came directly from the Browning letters. He wrote them about 30 or 40 years after the construction of the hotel. This was just a recount that he did to put it down in writing. And fortunately, this is all that we have. We've heard tales that there are some original, plans of the Tampa Bay Hotel somewhere in the area, but nothing has ever surfaced. So we're fortunate that the young architect way back in the 80s did the measured drawings. And we're hopeful that maybe there are some wood drawings around in somebody's attic or garage that they will turn over one day. Here's another page of his letters. He's talking about, that some of the cable from the Brooklyn Bridge was used, and, all kinds of different things, where all the lime came from and all the cement and all the brickwork. And it's a fascinating account. Down at the bottom of this one, it says the horseshoe arches can be seen at the opening of the hotel being Moorish. So then we're going on to some of Wood's other properties right here in Tampa. This is the Hillsborough County Courthouse that had the big dome on the rooftop, and that was constructed around 1891, and it is no longer there. It was taken down in the 1950s. And then the DeSoto Hotel in downtown was constructed in 1892 and 93. And it was a large structure. Here's the scale of it in an old historic postcard that you can see. And then also in Florida, he did a few other buildings. This was at one of the churches that he designed. Also,
and Susan, while we're on that slide, if you can go back to the church.
Here we go.
While looking at that work over top of the entryway, there were, in the 1890s, there were some advertisements for home styles that Wood was designing. And there was a small cottage, it was a single story, and it had that same sort of look to it over the porch and the front entrance to the home. And it was listed as, it was $1,200. Now, I don't know what the square footage of the space of the home was, but I thought that was interesting that he was designing these cottages with that similar look, and it actually had the price.
Yes, fascinating. And I don't think we mentioned, but Wood even had some designs he did down in Cuba. And we would love to get down there and explore and see if any of those properties are still left. So it was very prolific.
So I think that brings us to the end. Just a few images of our building. And of course, the Tampa Bay Hotel is one of the most spectacular achievements of wood that fortunately still stands. And so we hope it stands for many more years. Well, Susan, we've had some questions come in, unless there are some final thoughts that you wanted to share.
No, I think we should go to the questions and see what people are asking. I know one of the docents had asked some questions yesterday.
Well, let's start with those.
Okay. One says, I noted the balconies more closely. They were Juliet style. The fourth floor balconies around the minaret towers and the second floor balcony over the south entrance. Were they functional or ornamental? And I think they were probably functional. Way back in one of the slides, I think you could see the little windows that would open out. It wasn't a very deep balcony, but you could go out and get a view of, the grounds from standing atop the balcony. So I think those were functional. And then there was another question about today, in looking around the building, there were some fire escapes, and they asked if those were original. And no, they didn't have fire escapes originally. In fact, Plant advertised it as a fireproof building, and because of the red brickwork. But the the fire escapes were probably added when the university moved in and made dormitories in the building in the 1930s. And they still stand outside today. And then there was another question, number 2, there appears to be quite a bit more hotel beyond the dining room. What was that large angular part used for? Can you go into any more detail about that section, Heather?
Well, that space on beyond the dining room was the kitchen. And we know that from looking at early Sanborn fire insurance maps that notes that part of the building, and that was its use. And so that was the kitchen space. And I think Susan has brought up a slide and was trying to circle it there with her cursor.
Right. It goes on quite a bit further from the dining room all around there. And that was used as the kitchen, and the pastry chefs, had rooms there, and probably they had pantries there to store all the food. And then at the far north end to the right, that's where the wine cellar was located.
Yes, and you showed the schematic of that, and that's still visible today. If you walk out around that end of the building, you can see the ends of wine bottles coming through the brick. So we've had some other questions come in, and one was, is there really only one picture of J.A. Wood? Well, there's only one that we know of. If there are more out there, we would love to see copies of them so that we can add them to our reference materials. But as far as we know, it's the only known image.
Right. Everybody's gathering more information, and I'd love to go and do some more research at the AIA because we did find some things in Washington years ago about Wood. And, just as our archive is growing, everybody else's are too. So it's possible more pictures of him have come up. But what's kind of interesting, that picture we showed of the site visit, that shows Wood. And we didn't know that that was Wood for a long, long time. And then when the Browning family donated those letters, we were reading the letters, and the letters said, Wood always dressed in a light colored suit. And he's the only man in the picture in the light colored suit. So it's got to be Wood. So that's how we made that discovery. So it's kind of fun. We're learning things all the time.
And as Susan mentioned in her opening remarks, he is a bit of a mystery because there isn't much that's known about his personal life. But one question was, where did he die? And he died in New York City. And that was in 1910. Another question that came in is, are people able to go up in the minarets? Susan, would you like to answer that one?
Well, sure. The minarets are kind of off limits now just because of safety today. But occasionally, I think the University of Tampa will allow their students up there just to take a quick peek. But no, they aren't really accessible. But what you can do is go on YouTube and search for the minaret tour, and there is a minaret tour, maybe even more than one. And we didn't want to take up time today in this program to show the whole thing, but you can go on and actually see someone going up into a minaret, and it's quite fascinating. So please go on and look for that. And we have architectural guides available in our museum store that show all these different features of the building that are just fascinating. So come and go online and buy one.
So another comment that came in is that with such a diverse collection of styles that Mr. Wood mentioned in his early advertisement, do we know where he studied architecture? And I'm not aware of where he studied. Susan, are you familiar with that at all?
I am not sure where he studied, but I know that he did follow the architect that did Iranistan.
Leopold Edlitz.
Okay. He followed his buildings and designs and studies, so he could have worked with him. I'm really not certain, but I would love to find out that. That would be a little bit more research we need to do.
And along on that same line, the question was he an international traveler, which may have influenced his work?
I think that he was. I mean, I think I've read in our notes that he traveled through Europe.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree with that.
You know, copies of buildings and studied them that way. Also, it's not really known.
And speaking about his known works, we had the slide that mentioned that there are 40 known works that are attributed to him. And one of our volunteers a couple summers ago came to us and said she had discovered that her son, living in Greenwich Village, New York, is actually living in an apartment building that was designed by Wood. It's on Mercer Street. And so in his list of buildings, of those 40 buildings that are attributed to him, I don't know if that particular building is one of them. Perhaps it's a newer one, and it's something that those discoveries are continually being added to the list. So perhaps he's actually known for more than those 40. So we're thrilled. Again, people find information all the time, and we're delighted that they share it with us, because it's so important to helping us learn more and fill in some of these gaps that we didn't know about. So, and apparently that particular building was built in 1888. So another question that came in, Susan, did J.A. Wood design the Bellevue Inn?
No, he did not. That building was by the architects Miller and Kennard. No, he did not do any of Plant's other hotels.
And then the last two questions that I'm seeing, unless there are some others that are typing them in and we just haven't gotten them yet, is the question about the church, the image of the church. And that is in Green Cove Springs, Florida. And the photograph that we used looks like it's a relatively contemporary photograph, but I'm not 100% certain if it's still standing. But it is from Green Cove Springs, Florida. So are there any last questions either coming in on Facebook or in Zoom? We've received a message. There are still some coming in from Facebook. We just have to wait a moment. Well,
I'm not able to see them, so thank you for reading them.
Yes, so we're just waiting for those to come in. While we're waiting, just wanted to try a new feature as we're all learning and adjusting to using these online platforms. Oh. Wait, I don't think I can do it because Susan is screen sharing. Susan, might you stop the screen share and we'll try to use our polling feature.
Yes, yeah.
Or maybe I don't have the ability. Possibly if I could ask our behind the scenes magic technician, Lindsay, if she could search and see if she has the polling option on the bottom of her screen. We wanted to get an idea of how everyone on the Zoom call, on the Zoom platform enjoyed this. And so we did develop a poll. There it is. So if those of you listening and viewing on Zoom wouldn't mind taking a moment to click your vote, we'd appreciate it. And while you're all doing that, I will look and see what these questions are that have come in. All right, Susan, can you tell us a little bit about the historical elevator? Was that installed when the building was built?
Yes, it was. In fact, we have two Otis elevators. There was a passenger Otis elevator, and there was one for freight and your luggage, and they were back to back. And the old Otis passenger elevator still exists and is part of our property today. And its door is open, and you can take a peek inside and see the beautiful carved mahogany wood interior. And the funny thing is, the elevator is still operable. And when the university's new elevator breaks down, they get an attendant, and we use the old Otis elevator again. So they keep it tuned up, and it's still operable, just for backup when the new one breaks. And the new elevator is in the same footprint and area as the old freight elevator.
And I have to admit, it's worth the ride. So if you're ever fortunate to be in the building when they're doing maintenance on the modern elevator, it's worth riding in the Otis elevator. And along that thread of questions, it came in, do we know if Wood had encountered having to design elevators in other buildings? And that 1881 New York Times article that talked about Mizentop and Summit Mountain up in the Catskills, those two, it did mention that there was an elevator, at least a baggage elevator in the Summit Mountain house. It didn't mention any reference to a passenger elevator, but there was an elevator in that building that he designed. And it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, we have answered all the questions. So I don't see any more in the Q&A on Zoom or in the chat. And it looks like nothing else coming in on Facebook. So thank you everyone for participating in the poll. Oh, here's one more question. Did changes plant made at the Tampa Bay Hotel cause Wood to get sick? Susan, do you have any comments on that?
I don't know, but the notes from Browning did say that Wood went away for a time. I don't know if it was the stress of doing so many different properties all at the same time or what it was, but he did disappear for a short time, and work continued on, and then he came back on site. Plant, was changing up the plans. It was just going to be, a rectangular building, and then way into it, they did add on the solarium and the grand dining room. So, that would have made you want to pull your hair out probably. So, I don't know.
Well, again, thank you everyone for tuning in. We definitely appreciate you joining us. I want to mention that on Sunday at 2, we will have our live theater program, which will be Maggie Stroud, the laundress at the Tampa Bay Hotel. And it'll be a dramatic reading of that character. And then, Susan, do you want to mention next Wednesday's program?
I don't have that in front of me.
Sorry about that. Next Wednesday, I believe, is the 20th, and we'll have the conservator, Rustin Levinson, joining us to talk about conservation, and that'll be at 10 o'clock.
That's right. We're still working on that program. I don't have all my weeks in order, but yes, that's going to be a fascinating talk by Rustin Levinson about some of the conservation projects right here that took place with the museum's objects. So please join us.
Well, seeing no more questions, thank you all.
Thank you.